Hello, welcome to Berkshire Guitar Amplifier Repairs. Stuart Smith with you as always, and we have a lovely little lamp on the bench today. It's a 1959 Fender Champ Tweed. The customer wants me to look it over and do the absolute minimum possible to keep it working, bring it into spec, but not to do any unnecessary upgrades or changes. So I've just completed a video on this other customer's amplifier, which was a 1955 Tweed Deluxe. So we're going to do the same process with this amp here. First thing we'll do is power it up, see if it works, and then we'll spin it around and have a look in the back and see what it looks like. Okay, it's powered up, turned on. Ooh, crunchy. That's quite crunchy, isn't it? I assume it's supposed to sound like that. I wonder if the speaker's alright on this. That's more distorted than I would expect it to be. So they don't come a lot simpler than the Champ really. Just a couple of inputs, off on volume control, and that's it really, not even a tone control. Inside we have very simple circuit, some smoothing caps for the HT, a couple of coupling capacitors, one preamp valve, 5Y3 rectifier, 6V6 power valve, and just basically it's a single class A amp here, not even push-pull. So it can't produce a lot of power, that, so it might just be that you know, the amp is quite low power, so it doesn't take much to push it into crunch mode. I think I'd quite like to hang a speaker across there though and see if it cleans up a bit on a decent speaker. The speaker could be blown slightly, not sure. So there you go, very simple little amp really. Here's a schematic for this amp. So two inputs are just put together. They go through one stage of preamplification, and then volume control, another stage of preamplification, before being fed off to the 6V6, which is cathode bias via this 470 ohm resistor and this cathode bypass capacitor of 25 microfarads. And oh, it handily says 19 volts there, so we could have a little measure there and see what that is. Coupled in here, and standard 5x3 rectifier here to produce the DC, which is then smoothed by these three smoothing capacitors and a choke. These are the smoothing capacitors, 1, 2, 3 for the HT, and that's the cathode bypass capacitor for the first stage of amplification. I notice it has this capacitor here, which I don't like. I think it's a standard death cap there, so I think we'll just chop that one out. Other than that, I think we want to check that these capacitors aren't leaking. They almost certainly are. They are Astron capacitors, they always leak. And so if we have any DC voltage at all on the other end of those caps, those capacitors will need changing. So let's make that our first job. There's no obvious leaking on the HT caps, by the way, and there's no obvious hum, which would indicate an HT cap problem. So I'm going to leave those HT caps in. Remember, the customer's brief is to leave it as original as possible and not to change any components that don't need changing, i.e. they are not affecting the performance of the amp. So we'll leave those in. They'll go at some point, and if they do go, we'll just have a nasty hum and he can bring it back to me and I'll put some new ones in for him. Again, it's not a gig critical amp. So I think the first thing we want to do is, I think I'll have a look to see what this valve is, and then we'll check the leakage on those caps, see if they need changing. I bet you anything you like that they do need changing. Rightio, let's check the leakage on these caps. So on one side of the cap we've got 122 volts and 178 volts, as you'd expect. We need to have 0 volts here. So let's go down to a couple of volts and see what we've got on that cap. 0.3 of a volt, look, that cap is leaking. 1, ooh, crikey. 2 volts, that cap is leaking. And again, just to prove it's a leaking cap and not something strange, we can just heat them up with a hairdryer. And if it's a leaking cap, the leakage will get a lot worse. So remember we had can you see that? Yeah, we had 2 volts on here. We've now got 7 volts, look. And we had 0.2 or something on there. That's gone up to 2. So those 2 capacitors need changing. We'll do that. And whilst we're here, let's just have a quick look, see what's going on under here. I can get this cover off. There we go, and that's probably an original tube of some sort. Can't quite see the, it just says electronic tube. 12AX7, okay, that's an ECC83. Might be a GE, I can't quite see from that. Anyway, it's working okay. So on this amp, I think the only thing we're going to do is clip out this capacitor, which is going from the mains down to ground. If that capacitor ever fails, i.e. goes short circuit, you're putting mains straight down to ground, i.e. straight down to chassis. And that's another Astron capacitor, so that's already leaking. So I'm going to take that capacitor out and we're going to measure it on the Mega and see if it is in fact leaking. In other words, whether it's putting mains voltage onto the chassis. A certain amount of mains voltage, of course, not a huge full mains voltage. Right, let's push on with those jobs then. I think I might have pointed out the wrong resistor to you earlier. I'm not sure. Anyway, this is the cathode bypass resistor for the 6v6. This 470 ohm one here with its cathode bypass capacitor. I think I might have pointed out this one, which is the cathode bypass resistor and capacitor for the 12AX7. I'm just going to, I've got the amp on, I'm just going to measure what the voltage is across this cap here. Remember, we were looking for about 19 volts. Oh, look at that. Oh, you can't look at that. If only you could look at that. There you go. 18.99, 19 volts. Wow, that is freaky. So anyway, that's okay. I've got now taken out these 2 Ariston caps. I'm about to replace it with a decent 630 volt cap there. I don't seem to have any 220 nanofarad, so I'm just going to put a couple of these in parallel for each one. That'll do the job. And then we can power up the thing again and check that the DC is now gone from across these capacitors. And whilst I think about it, I'm just going to take out this capacitor here. Known as the death cap. There we go. And we will also see if that is leaking when we come to test the amp. I won't bother showing you me putting these caps in there. I'll just whack them in and then I'll join you in a moment. Okay, there we go. Quite a neat job. I've put those 2 caps in there, and I suppose if you really wanted to, we could prove to ourselves that the DC has gone. I think we hardly need to, just for maybe for the video for your interest. Okay, so we have 197 volts on that one, 186 on that, and we'll go down to 2, nothing on, nothing on there, look, 0.02. Sure we're getting on the chassis here, and nothing on there, look, 0.01. So that's good. That's solved that problem. We are not hearing any horrible hum as a result of removing that cap. So I think we're good to go on that. I think the only thing we'll do now is to just have a little play with these caps here and see which one of them were leaking and by how much. Well, in case you didn't see the other video I've just done on the other Fender, just a reminder, this device here is called a Mega, and it puts several hundred volts DC across these terminals, and then when you press this button, it puts several hundred volts across, and then it measures any leakage, or actually measures the resistance of the capacitors. So let's start off with the death cap. We shouldn't have any resistance at all. We should have an infinite resistance when I press this button. Whoa! So we had a capacitor from the mains voltage onto the chassis with leakage on it. Let's just warm up that capacitor and see if it gets worse with heat. And indeed it does. It's getting leakier and leakier and leakier, so as the amp warms up, the chassis gets more and more live. Isn't that good? And so does your guitar if you happen to touch the metal parts of it. So we're up to 400k now. Terrible. So we did very well to dump that one out. Right, let's check the other two. Well, we know these two are leaking because we tested them in the circuit, but let's just see how bad they are. So we're going to that one and this one. Press the button, and 10 meg. That one should be open circuit, of course. So that's leaking. Not really badly leaking, but still it is leaking. And this one, the same. Both 10 meg. And again, we don't need to do both of them. But let's just see what happens when we heat this up. And as you can see, it's getting worse and worse and worse the warmer it gets. So now it's about a 700k resistor. The other one will be identical. So those three are toast and well off out of this amplifier. Other than that, I don't think we need to do anything. I think the amp is good to go. So let's wrap this one up. Well, there we go. Nice little basic amp, Fender Champ, built in 1959. I was 6 years old at the time they were putting this together, so that's fun. And very simple circuit to this amp, really, not a lot to it. I did put another speaker across it and it was just as graunchy, so I think these amps, and they haven't got much power, of course. They're only in class A and a couple of watts, I don't know, 3 watts, 5 watts maximum. And so it doesn't take much to overdrive them, and that's probably why people like them, and they make a nice kind of a grungy sound. So there we go. Followed the customer's brief exactly. He wanted minimal change consistent with making the amplifier function. We could have done a lot more. He didn't want it, so that's what I've done. I always do exactly what the customer wants me to do. And we did well to get rid of that death cap, because that was actually leaking. So that's not good at all. So that was a very good move. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.